Yes. Happy New Year, Pacific Coast. And Happy New Year to those of you that are watching live online, and to those of you that may be watching this as a recording. We send you our love. Yes. So, about 2010, I stepped into my first Center for Spiritual Living, the Universal Spirit Center in San Diego. And honestly, I was a bit reluctant to be there. I wasn't really a churchy kind of person at the time, and I was really there to be supportive of a friend of mine who invited me to hear her sing. So I was just feeling awkward, and at the time, the Universal Spirit Center in San Diego was hosting their services out of the Masonic Temple, a Masonic lodge. So there I was, feeling awkward, and the surroundings were added a little bit to addition to my awkwardness at the Masonic lodge. But as I started to engage in the experience, the senior minister, Reverend Kevin Busey, spoke, and I was really amazed at how just genuine he was, how much he took his humanness, and he wasn't embarrassed about his humanness, and he brought that in and tied that in with his spiritual practice, and I'd never heard a minister do that before. And as I was listening to my friends sing, I was looking around the room, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is a community of people that believe pretty much the same thing that I've been practicing on my own. Because up till then, I had been studying Wayne Dyer and Abraham Hicks. Abraham Hicks has been a huge influence on my life, and of course, Louise Hay. So my whole plan had been to go to service and then as quickly and as soon as possible to make a polite exit. But I was so taken by this experience of realizing there's a community of people that believe like I believe, and they're out there practicing together, that I hung around for a little bit. I went to the community gathering, and I gravitated towards the books. They were selling books, and books are kind of my friend. And I approached the person that was staffing the books, and I said, "What do you recommend?" And they handed me this. The Science of Mind book by Ernest Holmes. Right? Yeah, it's just a little right. And here I am, standing with this thing that's kind of like a doorstop. And I said, are you sure this is the book I ought to be reading? Oh yeah, you want to read this book. And honestly, I don't know if it was just my pride and my politeness. I said, okay, yes. So I purchased the book, I took it home, and I kind of read it in kind of fits and starts. This book is over 650 pages. And the language, it was originally written by Ernest Holmes in 1926, was the original version, and later he revised it and expanded on it, and it was republished in 1938. And the 1938 version is the version that you will hear people most frequently reference. And the reason I'm bringing up the topic of the science of mind and Ernest Holmes is that in our tradition here at the Centers for Spiritual Living, at the beginning of the year, we generally review the first 3 chapters of the Science of Mind, the introductory chapters. For those of you that don't know who Ernest Holmes is, he wrote the philosophy of the Science of Mind. He was a metaphysician, and his teachings are the basis for our teachings here at the Centers for Spiritual Living. Now, as I mentioned, this is really in our age of TLDR, too long didn't read. This is a pretty hefty read. This is not a 30-second elevator speech or a 250-word snippet of wisdom. And it can be intimidating. Its pronouns are dated. It was written almost 100 years ago, and some of the language that's used there and the explanations that Ernest had to create were because there weren't the language at the time. If you think about what was going on back in the 20s and 30s, what the world must have been like. So those concepts that he's described didn't really exist or weren't discussed in the same way as they are now. A little bit about Ernest is that actually the first chapter of the book, I should say, is The Thing Itself. What a title for a first chapter, an entry to the book. The Thing Itself. Before I get into what the thing itself is, I want to just tell you a little bit more about Ernest. He was born in 1887 into a Protestant family in very modest means in Lincoln, Maine. He didn't have an extensive formal education, but he was very curious, and he read a lot. Some call him an autodidact, but he was self-taught. When he was about 15, that would be 1902, he left his home in Maine, and he went to Boston. And there in Boston, he started to pursue some of his personal interests. One of his interests was in performance and public speaking. So he started to attend classes at the Leland Powers School in Boston. Public speaking was, people went often to hear public speakers at that time. There was no television, there was no radio. And during that time, he got introduced to the works of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and who he would cherish throughout his life. And he would say reading Emerson was like drinking water to him. And he also became introduced to Mary Baker Eddy and Christian Science teachings, which is in the New Thought lineage that we practice. And eventually that would lead him to studying briefly with Emma Curtis Hopkins, the grandmother of New Thought. So he's really, at this time, laying his foundation as a speaker and as a teacher and a metaphysical healer. In 1912, he came out here to California, to Venice, California, to join his brother Fenwick. And in 1919, he publishes his first book, The Creative Mind. Over the course of his life, he'll publish about 13 or so books, in addition to the Science of Mind magazine, countless articles. In 1927, he meets Hazel Foster, and Hazel was described as a LA socialite and would eventually become a powerful practitioner in her own right. And in 1927, Ernest marries Hazel. And they stay married for about 30 years until Hazel passes in 1957. And they were very close, and it was very hard for Ernest to let go of Hazel. And it was a heavy loss for him. Ernest will shed his mortal coil in 1960. Now, you may not know that Ernest was a commanding speaker, and he had a very large audience. A large following. And that he was known towards the later in his career, he had to find increasingly larger venues to speak at, and he would speak at the Biltmore Hotel, for example, that could hold up to about 3,000 people. So it speaks to what an audience he had. He also had a radio show and a TV show at one point, and if you go out to YouTube or the Science of Mind archives, you can still hear his talks. I was introduced to Ernest Holmes through his writings and the recorded talks. But more recently, I've become to understand and appreciate that he was a very powerful metaphysical healer. And there are countless stories of people that went to Ernest for healing through prayer. His brother Fenwick tells a story about a World War I veteran. Remember, Ernest lives through World War I, through World War II. So this veteran from World War I, this British veteran of World War I, had shell shock, or what we would now call PTSD. He was in really bad shape, and he heard about Ernest, and he traveled across the ocean, across the continent, to spend time with Ernest for prayer. And according to this gentleman, he did receive a healing, and it changed his life, and he was able to move on with his life. And that happened before the publication of The Science of Mind in 1938 or 1926. So it tells you that Ernest already had established himself as a healer long before he had actually started his writing process. What Ernest called a spiritual mind treatment, we might more easily understand as an affirmative prayer that we currently practice here at the Centers for Spiritual Living. And Ernest believed fervently that anyone can learn this prayer. Anyone can make this contact with the divine and to heal their lives. So what I've come to understand about this book is that this is a textbook that he wrote for doing those prayers. So he dives in really deep. You don't need to read the book to learn how to do the prayer, but it's just to inform, to dive into it more. So I'm supposed to be here talking about the thing itself. And in the first chapter of this book, what Ernest is doing, and he's setting us up for, is before we can learn to pray, to really understand, to have these deep prayers, is we need to understand the nature of God and our relationship as human beings to that God of our understanding. The first sentence is, we all look forward to the day when science and religion shall walk hand in hand through the visible to the invisible. That's how he starts the book. He starts talking about the relationship of science and religion. Remember, in his day, there was even more of a chasm between science and religion than there is now. We're starting to really see science and scientific understanding come into, the research is starting to help us understand what we've always considered metaphysical. So there's kind of this joining that's happening again. But at that time, it was even further apart. So he wants us to understand that to understand the metaphysical, we're going to apply scientific principles to that, a scientific understanding of, or a scientific process of understanding. The road to freedom lies not through mysteries or occult performances, but through the intelligent use of nature's forces and laws. The law of mind is a natural law in the spiritual world. What Ernest is telling us is that there's a natural order to things. There's a natural laws that are at play and at work. That there's nothing mysterious about the way the universe works, about the way God works in our lives, that we can come to understand what it is. And he ties it in deeply to our freedom and our ability to make choice, our free will. So, before we go deeper into prayer, which we're going to look into more over the next couple of weeks, is we need to understand what he means by mind. And what Ernest described as mind, he meant consciousness. And he said that although we have two words that we use for consciousness, the conscious consciousness and subconscious consciousness, that they are really one and the same consciousness that we have. And this is an imperfect analogy, but I'm going to use it to help describe what I'm talking about. And also, I did use a GPT to generate this image, so I don't know how accurate the whole root system is there. So think about your conscious mind as that part that you see, the part of the tree you see above the ground. Right? The tree, the trunk, the branches, the leaves. When you recognize the thoughts you're thinking, when you're thinking about the words you're going to speak, when you're thinking about, you're conscious of the actions you're taking. That's your consciousness.
The monkeys in the trees.
The monkeys in the trees. Well, are the monkeys in the trees? Sometimes we're conscious of the monkeys in the trees, and sometimes we're unconscious of the monkeys in the trees, right? So that's a good segue, Ryan, into the subconscious. So the subconscious is everything that's below the surface. In this case, the roots of the tree. There's no separation between the roots that are below the surface and the tree that's above the ground, just as there's no separation in our minds between our conscious thought and the subconsciousness. It's just all of our consciousness. It's all of our mind. And the subconscious maybe come out to play in our dreams. It may be those monkeys that are swinging around that we're not aware of that are influencing our lives. It could also be those things that we've been taught that we're unaware of that we've been taught that are influencing us. Now, another thing to notice about where our subconscious or our subconscious lies is in the earth, like the tree roots are in the earth. Our subconscious is in the consciousness of God. This one mind. So we experience our lives as individuals, but we are, in reality, individuated expressions of the one mind. So our connection with the divine is through our consciousness, and our subconsciousness is in that oneness. Following along a little bit here? Okay. And we'll talk more, I think, probably in the coming weeks about how this works and how to make it operate in your life. The mind which we discover within us is the mind that governs everything. This is the thing itself, and we should recognize its simplicity. The thing itself is the oneness that we know of as God, as spirit, as source, as life source. And Ernest encourages us to not be afraid of it, but to be in awe of it. That because of this spirit that is us, individuated as us, is expressing through us, we have this freedom to connect with spirit. Always. It is always there and present for us. And supporting us and guiding us as we become aware of what we're thinking. And through our thought, we can change the experience and our perception of life itself. And with that comes an enormous power and responsibility. Yes? Yeah. So, would you like your call to action for the week? Yes. All right. Your call to action this week is to pause from time to time and ask yourself, where did that thought come from? Who's thinking that thought? Who taught me to think that thought? Just pay attention to what you're thinking. All right. Got a couple more minutes? All right. One more minute. Why don't you just untangle yourself and put your feet on the floor? Sit up. Allow the chair that you're sitting in or wherever you're at to just support you. Just as the divine supports you in all that you do. And as we start this beautiful new year, we know that right here, right now, there is this divine creative spirit that is life, that is God, that is love, that is joy, that is freedom. And this freedom is our freedom. This joy is our joy. This life is our life expressing through us right here and right now. And each and every moment, we have the power to transform our lives, to transform the world, to make this the place that we know that it can be, to live in the world that we all know is possible. And with great gratitude, I release this knowingness of this power of this life, of the divine, expressing through myself and each and every individual that hears these words. And I say, thank you. Thank you, life. And I release it, knowing it's done and it's good. And so it is. Thank you, Pacific Coast. Have a very happy New Year.